In all those years, I got refreshed into our memories many times. He never told us what it was. I speculated on a few occasions. A whole lot of times privately, sometimes publicly. I never gave the impression I had the answer or revelation because I didn't have it. And just prior to God giving us the full revelation, to take prior to that, I said, I'm looking to God to give it and tell us when they're going to come down and tell this lie. Then as God began to break it down again Sunday, he said, I will send them a strong delusion. That will come from God. Then he says that they might believe the lie. Now, here's the basics about God. One basic about God is that God cannot lie. That's just fixed. That's going to reinforce that in the Hebrews. Chapter 6. One thing I love about God is that he's always mindful of who he's dealing with. Us. And God takes every means possible to make his promises believable to us. In the case of men, we make a promise to each other we sometimes swear. Oh, the Bible tells us not to. Why is that? Because as humans, we don't always have the ability to back up our swear. You know? Sometimes we do something a little less than that, but almost the same thing. I promise. Nothing worse than somebody throw it back in the face and say, you promised. You realize how frail and human you really are when you can't keep a promise that you made and said you promised because you're sure you keep it. I've been called a liar because I didn't keep a promise. Liars and a promise breaker are two different things altogether. A lie is something you tell with the intent to deceive. A promise is something you make with the intent of really keeping your word and what you promised, what you said. But again, as humans, we really can't promise. Because there's so many factors out of our control. We'll touch on I'll be here. I promise. Then the day before you have to go, your car breaks down. Or maybe on the way there. This is a broken promise. Not because you lied to someone or trying to mislead them. You just couldn't keep your word. That's what makes God different, is that God keeps his word. He doesn't have to ever say, I promise. When God says he promised something, it's for our benefit, because we're so quick not to believe. If God goes out and does this, and swears something, it's a strong promise by God, with the intent that we will have complete confidence he's going to keep his word. But God never has to promise. He has no need to say, I promise, or I swear, because his word goes out, it's law. It's going to happen. That's the characteristic of kings. When they say something, the strength of their kingdom, of their ability to keep their word, is based on doing what they say, even if it's wrong. There's some stories in the Bible where kings made a promise, then the promise backfired on them. Like when Salome danced for Herod at his birthday party, and he promised to give her half his kingdom. I don't know what kind of dance it was. It must have been called a dance. Then her mother told her, ask for John the Baptist's head on the charger. And that broke the king's heart. He didn't want to do that. He knew that John was a prophet from God, but his word had gone on. Pilate did the same thing. He wrote on the cross, on the card, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The Jews came back, upset about it. They don't say King of the Jews, say that he said he's King of the Jews. God said, what I've written, I've written. It's like, I'm not going to take it back. And the king's got that particular characteristic from God himself. His word goes out. He never says, oops. I don't think God can spell oops. He doesn't have to say, I'm sorry, made a mistake, my bad, nothing like that. His word is firm. Illustration here, chapter 6, verse 13. For when God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself. Now thus, we try to swear by somebody greater than us. Sometimes I hear people swear their parents. I heard a new expression today. Somebody said, I swear on everything. So that's a new one, swearing on everything. Well, who's God swear by? He's the greatest. So it said he swore by himself. It means he put himself in the middle of keeping his own word. God gives a breakdown. He stood here and told Abraham, surely blessing, I will surely bless you. And multiplying, I will surely multiply you. He made himself the mediator of his own word. And so, after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise, talking about Abraham. For a man verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them the end of all strife. Now, so when men swear, they swear by something greater to them, and when they make an oath, in our days, this can stand for the same thing, a handshake. They make a bet, they say, let's shake on it. And the handshake is serious. You bet on the game, you have the money in your pocket to put the bet down, you shake on it, right? And you expect that person to pay when they owe you, correct? They can't do just a little handshake. Well, the handshake took place of your money. You bet $100, didn't have $100, so you shook on it, and that's just as good as you have $100. So you lose the bet, you're expected to produce the money that the shake verified, correct? Yeah. That's how men do business, he says in verse 16, for men. Wherein God, willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, I don't recall reading that word anyplace else, not just in the Bible, but any place, period. Check your concordance, Randy. See how many times that word appears. I think this is the only place. Immutability.
One time.
One time, okay? Anytime the word appears one time in scriptures, that's the word that God reserves to himself, okay? Immutability means unchangeability. That which cannot be changed, okay? To show unto the heirs of promise the unchangeability of his counsel, confirmed it with an oath. I was to say it again, not that God needed an oath, but to show unto the heirs of promise. So they'll feel better about his word. God just confirmed it with an oath. That by two immutable things, in which it was impossible for God to lie. What are the two things? The immutability of his counsel, and the fact it's impossible for him to lie. And if that quality, that characteristic isn't a part of God, everything we study is worthless. What gives it its teeth and its strength is the fact that God, who gave forth these promises and everything, cannot lie. If he promised the resurrection, he cannot lie. If he promised the rapture, he cannot lie. If he promised a strong delusion, he cannot lie. And I'm amazed how God puts things in his word for way in the future. I give Satan credit for being a long-range planner. I should give God even more so that. And that's what we came across in Deuteronomy Sunday. The book of Deuteronomy is primarily a review of what took place from the time of Egypt until Moses passed away. But in Deuteronomy 13, again I find it interesting at least, that this should arise in the 13th chapter. You get the impression, I'm pretty sure that he's coming this year, you're right. Number one, he hasn't said anything different than that. Then looking back at all the things that God has been saying over the years, it's all being confirmed. When I read Children Idol's message, top of their agenda is to come down. They're pushing for first contact like the ways you won't believe. And they're going to change this world. The government, the economy. That's the only reason that we've been allowed to print trillions of dollars and it's been okay for everybody. I mean, I would think that China would resist that, first of all, because it hurts them the most probably. Just because of the investments they have here. But any country that has investments in our economy has to hurt them. We're $16 trillion in debt. How can that happen? Because they know they'll never pay it. It's going to all change. The whole world economy is going to change. So they're letting that slide because it's going to change. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. Right now, it would not happen. It could not happen. There's no way in the world. It was so offset the balance of the economy around the world that it couldn't happen. But that's why it's allowed, because of a great change taking place. Anyhow, God lays down a foundation of warning against false prophets. Now, when I first came across and I was studying this, I never read past the first verse because I thought it was the wrong text I was looking for. I thought the first reference to a false prophet was the definition somebody knows that if a prophet speaks something in the name of the Lord and it doesn't come to pass, then that's a false prophet. I thought that was the first definition in the scriptures. Right? And so I glanced at this one, but that's not it. I looked for the real one. Then Sunday, it's for church, I read it again, I read past the first verse, and so well, it is what I want. I'm surprised that this is the first definition God gives for a false prophet. And the other one, a prophet speaks something that doesn't come to pass, that's his second definition for a false prophet. Now, there are many, when we first prophesied the rapture, in 97, I got the label false prophet. And it shows where the head of the church is. I said for many years, God's message is progressive. I said my mom's funeral. I said, if I'm a false prophet, so is Jesus and the apostles. They prophesied something that didn't come to pass. They said, behold, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then, on the day when Zechariah's sign was about to be fulfilled, Zechariah said, behold, your king cometh unto you lowly, and riding upon an ass and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. That was about to take place. And before Jesus started that trip, it said he spoke a parable to them because they thought that the kingdom of heaven should immediately appear. And it should have. But God delayed it. He went through the activity. Your king is coming. He came, like Zechariah said, riding upon an ass. He got off the ass at some point, got up on the colt, and rode to Jerusalem at the cries of Hosanna, right? To the point that the religious leaders told him to tell everybody to shut up. He said, they don't say something, the rocks cry out and praise me. But the kingdom should have come that day. But he said, it won't come today. Because they rejected the king and the kingdom. Those who cried, I don't say those who cried, but the cry went out that Saturday, Hosanna, and 4 days later, the cry went out, crucify him. You can't have them both. The will of the people was that he died. And the will of the priesthood and religious leaders that he died, so he's crucified. So the kingdom didn't come because the king was killed. And the kingdom will come later on, right? This case here, he said, there rise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams. I think it's interesting how that God puts a false prophet in the same category as a dreamer. I had a crazy dream today. It's somewhere in LA, and everybody's riding motorcycles. They're all shooting at each other. Everybody. We were dreaming. Somebody shot something at me. It's like a string or something, kind of fluid. It went about 300 yards and hit me. They had my shirt soaked, so I said, well, I got to get this guy. So I turned around on my motorcycle, went back, and ran into him. And we both blew it. I think I just get a lot of ice cream before. I hope that's what it was. Anyhow, somebody comes along and says and gives you a sign or a wonder. And the sign or the wonder come to pass. Wherever expected to be. Now this one here, I preached when I first preached about false prophets. I preached this one second because I know it's in the Bible. Totally surprised me. That somebody could give a sign or a wonder and it comes to pass. The first thing I asked myself, the question was, how can that happen? How can they give a sign or a wonder and it comes to pass? How can this happen without God being in the mix some kind of way? Answer is, it can't. God has to influence the situation, and he touched that. He says in verse 3, thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet, or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God proveth you. What does that say? He signs off on it. He's the one that gave him the prophecy. The wonder is going to come to pass. He gave it to him. Why, Lord? To prove you. To prove you, to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Because if you love God with all your heart and all your soul, you love God's word first with all your heart and all your soul. So they came along and gave a prophecy, comes to pass. God made it happen. Here God says, going back over to this Sunday, on this aspect of the message. God said I will send them a strong delusion. What was it? He will alert them to an event.